This video is something I've wanted to talk about for quite a bit, but every time I tried to get my thoughts in order about the subject, I would kind of just lose motivation or not know where to even start. I feel like this fandom is such a complicated subject, and I've talked about it before in a more positive light, where I highlighted the good parts of the community and the problems with stereotyping all furries into the same category of people, which, by the way, let me just say, is undoubtedly the most readily made video up on my channel to this date. I don't know how I listened back to that underwater-ass audio quality thinking, yeah, this is great, I'm gonna put this on YouTube and post it so thousands of people can hear me stammering and taking awkwardly long pauses and bouncing from ear to ear because I apparently didn't feel like doing a second take. But anyways, regardless of the abomination of audio quality in that video, I still agree with the points that I made, but I still want to address the problems within the fandom because they've been apparent issues that have existed for so long, and some of them are so heavily normalized that it's high-key concerning. And something I do want to say before I get started is that this isn't a hate video or something, if that's not obvious already by the fact that I'm quite clearly a part of the fandom myself. This isn't an attack on furries or a call to action to start harassing people because of their interests, so long as they're not hurting themselves or others in the process. Again, I still agree with the points that I brought up in that other video, whether you've seen it or not, that a lot of the harassment from people outside the community is often unwarranted and too far. But as someone who has been in this community for years, there are a lot of things that make me really uncomfortable that, in an ideal world, I'd really want to see change. Also, I do want to clarify that I am under 18, so there are topics that you might think belong in this video that probably do, but I don't want to cover them because I don't want to research them, nor do I want to participate in any discussion of them because I'm a child. Not to say that they don't exist and they're not problems, they probably are, but out of my own safety, I will be avoiding them. So whether you're a furry or you're not, whether you're familiar with these situations or you're not, here are the toxic behaviors and issues in the furry fandom. This was definitely the first thing that came to my mind, and for a reason. The lack of respect and acknowledgement of boundaries and overall disregard for personal space and privacy is a huge, pressing problem in this community, and one that I've by far had the most misfortune of dealing with. And this definitely doesn't apply to everyone. In fact, nothing in this video applies to every single furry, and you're probably going to hear me reiterate something along those lines very frequently, because it's definitely not everyone, and if it was everyone, I wouldn't involve myself with the good sides of the fandom. But there definitely exists a group of people in this community that have pretty much normalized the concept of overstepping or assuming other people's boundaries, and even though I would say that a majority of the fandom isn't like this, that group of people really does make it everyone else's problem, and because of that, they're very hard to ignore. I'm sure a lot of you instantly had an image in your mind of what types of people that I'm talking about, but in case you aren't as familiar, I'm going to explain what it feels like interacting with someone in this community who completely steps over or blatantly ignores any boundaries you've set for yourself. These types of furries normalize uncomfortable and unconsensual roleplays in your DMs, forcing themselves into your friend zone with little to no reciprocation from you, begging for free art and free shit without seeming to take into account or care about how rude it is, giving way too much personal information way too soon and expecting the same from you, using you as a mental crutch, and sometimes even begging for a romantic or more serious than romantic relationship from you, again without your reciprocation. This might even sound familiar to you outside the furry fandom because people like this exist in all contexts, but it's especially true in the fandom specifically and a lot more normalized. Something I have had to deal with time and time again is people from this fandom approaching me in the ways I just mentioned, in all of the ways I just mentioned. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against people being friendly, and I'm pretty open to making new friends. But when I make friends, especially online, I want those friendships to flow and start naturally, in ways that don't feel strange or uncomfortable. And I don't want strangers on the internet, very often adults significantly older than me, going from 0 to 100 in an unnatural amount of time, very often because they want something or have some ulterior motive, and not because they want to form a normal and healthy relationship. And something I do want to make clear is that I understand that not everyone can interpret tone and social cues the same way, and this is especially true through text. But I believe there are certain lines that we should just not be crossing, and there is a difference between having a hard time differentiating between tone and forcing yourself onto another human being and deciding their boundaries for them without establishing an actual relationship with this person or respecting them or avoiding certain actions that would make them uncomfortable. I am someone who definitely struggles with tone and social cues, and sometimes I do make mistakes thinking someone wasn't sarcastic when they were, or thinking someone was serious when they weren't, and my friends have had to tell me in the past. But I don't do those things that I had just mentioned, because that isn't an issue of not interpreting tone correctly. That's an issue of assuming someone else's limits and or deciding them for yourself because of what you want out of this person instead of allowing conversations and friendships and whatever to flow naturally. Whatever your intentions were, whether malicious or not, impact matters just as much, if not more, than intent. Even though sometimes people like this genuinely do mean well, it doesn't change how it affects the person on the receiving end, and they still feel annoyed or violated whether they meant for that to happen or not. The biggest thing I've had the misfortune of dealing with is people forcing a friendship in an unnatural pattern, where they start with a greeting or something simple but very rapidly allow it to spiral out of control, where they go from saying hello to messaging me several times a week, multiple times a day, getting really personal, and sharing a concerning amount of details about themselves, where all the while I'm literally just sitting in psychology and I have no idea that they're blowing up my notifications with a step-by-step status report of their day and their past mental traumas. And again, I'm not trying to sound pretentious or unfriendly, I hope that's not how I'm coming off, but in my opinion, there's really no good reason why a stranger on the internet, oftentimes again an adult, should be messaging me at a higher frequency than my in real life closest friends. And don't misunderstand me. That's not a diss on my friends. And it gets to a problematic point where not only are they messaging super often, which is concerning on its own, but they're also treating strangers as they would their closest friends since elementary school, and where they're using them as a venting outlet or a personal therapist. And it gets stressful because oftentimes if you don't respond to these messages, either because you genuinely don't know how to, because you're not a licensed professional, or simply you just haven't seen the messages yet, they start to get aggressive or offended and oftentimes stress you out even more to the point where you are prioritizing this person over your other commitments because you've been forced into the responsibility over maintaining someone else's mental health or even life. And again, this isn't just a furry fandom thing, this happens everywhere with people everywhere, but I've seen it more frequently, specifically in this community, because furries are very welcoming and open, which is great, don't get me wrong, but creates ground for people like this to behave this way without any repercussion for it. Or find people to surround themselves with who will behave a similar way, and as such normalize that way of approaching another person, to the point where they apply that normalization to everyone they talk to, and start to assume everyone will be okay with it. And if you want to do these things individually with your friends, that's fine, so long as they are okay with it, but you can't assume this applies to everyone. I think taking friendships at a realistic pace benefits both the other person and you, because if you just expect a close friendship on day one, you skip the stage where you get to know the person, and you don't know if they're actually the type of person you'd want to be friends with. For all you know, they could have little personality traits or behaviors that don't go well with you, or that you don't like. And you don't want to be deciding the closeness of your friendship with anyone when you don't know them that well. How someone presents themselves online or to the public or when they're in a costume does not necessarily reflect their real true personality in every aspect. Something to remember always and forever is that you don't necessarily baseline owe any sort of relationship to anyone, and if someone is making you feel like you do owe them a relationship, that's a red flag. It's one of the big icks I have with the furry fandom, with just expecting friendship day one and getting upset or even aggressive when that behavior makes other people uncomfortable. And everyone views the world differently, and some people are okay with a stranger approaching them and role-playing with them on day one, but again, you just really shouldn't make assumptions about anyone's boundaries because that doesn't apply to everyone. At least I can say it makes me personally very uncomfortable, and I'd like to assume I'm not alone with that. And it's not just the whole scenario I brought up that fits into this category. There's also smaller things that might not take the same toll on the receiver's mental health, but are still annoying all the while. A big thing I've noticed is that there are some furries who don't realize how long it takes to create handmade art. But since furries love art, which is nice because it gives me and others a platform to share our work and enjoy others' work, it makes these people really rude about approaching other people and expecting free work from them or hassling them for work like this. And sometimes it's a little more weird, but sometimes it's pretty straightforward where they want art of their OC, but they don't want to pay you or respect you like that. Maybe they're broke and they can't, but either way, they don't intend on giving you any sort of financial compensation. And it might not sound that offensive, but I think it's important to put into perspective just how rude it is to ask someone who has their commissions advertised in their bio, who might sell their art as a job, to make you art for free when you don't even know them. It's like walking into a restaurant, swaggering up to the counter, and asking them to make you a sandwich. And when people do this to me, I usually respond by saying, I don't do art for free, but here's a link to my commissions website. And the funniest thing is that oftentimes they get passive-aggressive, or aggressive not passively, as if they weren't the person who approached me first in a pretty rude manner. If you walk up to the sandwich dude asking for free food, they'd probably say, yeah, we don't just hand out sandwiches, but we actually sell food here, and there's a menu up there. And imagine how goofy you'd look if you start fighting with this cashier who, like most artists, is tired and probably isn't paid enough for this shit. I think it's just very fascinating to me how these types of furries can appreciate art so much. Like, they absolutely love art and they want it really bad and really enjoy art of their characters, but be so disrespectful to the people who make it. Like, it's genuinely interesting. It's something I'd want to look into with more detail because it's just so crazy to me how you can really love art but not care about commissioners or the people who you want to get that art from. It ties into the whole weird friendship thing because I think a part of the reason some furries do this toxic forced friendship behavior is because they want, at the end of the day, free art. That's not always the case, and sometimes it's a little more fucked up than that, but I've definitely experienced interactions where I could pretty much see where it was going. The reason I can understand this, not excuse it, but understand it, is because when I was like 7 or 8-ish on Scratch and stuff, I would always see more established artists who were friends with each other, trading art back and forth and surprising each other with gifts. And I thought, wow, it'd be really nice to have an art friend like that, and I'd see my favorite artists who I thought were really cool, and I'd want to be friends with them because I wanted that same relationship. But I was 8. And even being 8, I never went and approached them and forced a friendship like this. It's kind of concerning that people in the furry fandom are still doing this type of stuff, and it's one of the major concerns this community raises for me. It's so normalized to behave like this, and I'm not sure why exactly, but it's weird and borderline creepy. I used to semi-actively maintain Twitter before I switched to YouTube as my main platform. I still check it sometimes, but I don't really post there anymore. But back when I did, something that always struck me as confusing and kind of weird was the mutual culture and the approach to controversy in the furry fandom. Specifically on Twitter, but not limited to it at all, expanding to basically wherever furries are, including YouTube, just not as frequently because of how the algorithm works, I guess. There's a lot of controversies in the furry fandom that are seemingly never any closer to being resolved, and I feel like there are more in this fandom than most others, mainly due to its size and its age, since there's just such a wide age range of people due to how long it's been around for, and some things were more normalized in the 2000s than they are now because people are kind of just realizing that they have the moral issues that they do with those things, or didn't speak up about them in earlier years, but have the amount of people behind them now to feel comfortable addressing it. And out of all the online communities and their different approaches to controversies like this, furries handle it, by far, the most immaturely and embarrassingly. And that's saying something. We're talking about the internet, dog. There's definitely a spectrum of that immaturity where one end leans towards being way too relaxed and the other way too strict. Some furries will wear it as a badge of honor that people hate them and turn it into some sort of personality trait that, ooh, look at me, people don't like me because I have problematic opinions and I'm always in the middle of controversy. And no matter what your beliefs truly are and what I think about them, I'm gonna find you annoying if you behave this way no matter what. Because, okay, let me be real with you. When you're approaching any sort of debate or argument or controversy where there are typically two polarizing opinions such as this is ethical or this is unethical, the end goal is not to advertise how much you hate the other side necessarily. The end goal is to determine the side that aligns more heavily with your values and ideally explain your reasoning for this to other people, so that they can at the very least take it into consideration and either explain their own side or recognize and appreciate yours, hopefully both. You aren't accomplishing anything good for the world by immature name-calling, telling people to off themselves, or blatantly ignoring the other side. And yes, I agree that some beliefs are just so incredibly cringe that there really isn't much of a defense for them, but I also feel like we should give people the chance at recovery, since oftentimes the reason they hold these unethical beliefs is because they genuinely do not understand the issue with them and haven't heard a digestible explanation towards why they should change their opinion. Just a lot of people calling them homophobic slurs. The truth of the matter is that when you resort to ad hominems and logical fallacies, nobody wants to listen to you. Whether or not you think they should listen to you, they're not going to. In fact, you're just strengthening a victim mentality for them and making them see you as further in the wrong. And I'm not saying they are victims. Oftentimes, they are not. But you're making them feel like they are and making them be able to justify why you are the villain in the situation. I've seen furries change their minds about certain topics after doing more research into them and hearing alternate perspectives, but I think the widely used immature approach furries have towards controversy where they just yell at each other back and forth is just kind of stupid because we aren't giving people the opportunity to change their opinion. And I'm going to provide you with this. If you're arguing about ethics, but you don't really care whether or not the person you're arguing with actually changes their minds or their lifestyle, do you actually care about what's right or wrong, or do you just find arguments and drama entertaining? Do you actually care about the thing you're arguing for if you're not genuinely trying to make a change or impact on the person that you're arguing with or the world? On the other end, there's furries who try to turn everything into drama, including stuff that doesn't really matter that much or genuinely just is ridiculous. Furries who just look for reasons to cancel other creators when those reasons aren't true or are based on shaky or entirely fabricated evidence. Something big I used to see was people judging another person based on who they follow, which, hear me out, sometimes that makes sense. Like if they're following a bunch of accounts that all share the same bad category of content, so there's like an obvious reason why they're following all these people, but sometimes it's kind of unfair. I don't do full background checks when I press a follow button. If something comes to my attention about someone I follow that's concerning, then yeah, I won't hesitate to go unfollow them. But when someone is outed as a terrible person for evidence they were actively trying to conceal from their fans and their audience, and then all their followers turn into a target, it feels unfair to me because, like, dude, I haven't seen the call out yet. No, I don't support everything they've said in the past 2 decades. I just literally didn't know about it. Just tell me why. I think that transitions into my other point for this section, that the mutual culture of furry Twitter, or I suppose just Twitter in general, is that 2 people following each other inherently makes them friends. Which it doesn't, at least not all of the time. I follow a lot of people who follow me back, and we both do typically have a mutual respect for each other, either for each other's skill, personality, viewpoints, or a combination. But following someone does not inherently mean that I know every intricate detail about them or their opinions. And when controversy surfaces, it's often that I just really didn't know that they had those kinds of feelings since they actively tried to hide it, if that makes sense. If you see a cool tweet with a pretty drawing and you go follow that person, you oftentimes don't know what else they posted on that account leading up to that post. And if they don't advertise their sentiments in their bio or pinned posts, or don't actively tweet about it, I'm not gonna know. There exists a lot of controversies in the furry fandom that really do split the fandom down the middle, and some of them are just so outright ridiculous that it's incredible to me that they even have to be an argument to begin with. Since sometimes it's about stuff that's like legitimately illegal that you shouldn't even have to argue about, and you should generally be able to recognize the problem with. A lot of furries take that hate and, as I mentioned before, turn it into a personality trait, which makes it hard for them to recognize why people take an issue with it. And it's oftentimes frustrating for me to see because it's just really embarrassing and annoying and overall really immature. I understand being proud of yourself and trying to deflect hate. Me personally, I kind of express my distaste for general cringe culture through my art by kind of displaying bright, colorful characters and parading my love for that type of energy and aesthetic in artwork. But I think that's completely different than taking an actual controversy, like an actual argument over like ethics and morals, and passing it off as cringe culture when it's not really the same thing. People aren't just fighting with you because they think you're cringy. They're doing so because they think your behavior is a serious affront and they think it hurts others or animals or whatever ridiculous stuff you're getting up to. Even if you disagree with the other side, I think we should still be approaching these things seriously and not as immaturely as the furry fandom often does. This is definitely a huge deal and unfortunately not something I can realistically get into too much detail about since, again, I am a child myself. So you'll have to fill in a few of the gaps here with your own hindsight and imagination. Now, I will say that I don't think that minors shouldn't be allowed to interact with the fandom. Of course, obviously not. That's a silly expectation, especially because there are so many gateways into the furry fandom that are child-friendly, and many children who did find it, including myself, found it through these child-friendly gateways, meaning the fandom is very largely comprised of people under 18. There exist spaces in the furry community that minors can safely interact in. The responsibility of child safety does not fall on the shoulders of the minors in the fandom, at least not all of it. It goes to the adults who should know how to keep adult content out of spaces that they are aware are populated by a minor audience. Make a separate 18+ account, please, please, please. You can also argue parental supervision also plays a huge role, which it does as well, but that doesn't excuse adults in this community endangering children or exposing them to adult themes or media, which is something that happens, and something that shouldn't. Now, this isn't me saying that all furries are child predators. Please do not walk away from this video thinking that. It's a really, really harmful stereotype, and it's not true. The vast majority isn't. But that group of people does need to be addressed, in my opinion, either way. And maybe they're not predators, but they are just generally bad because they're endangering minors, whether that was their intention or not. Don't generalize all furries into the same category, but don't ignore the issue either. Something I've said for a while and will continue to say is that a lot of furry content creators don't make their intended audience clear enough. In my opinion, if you post any sort of adult content on your account that children shouldn't be interacting with or seeing, you should specify that your account is 18+, either with that little emoji thing, by writing it in your bio, in a pin post, whatever, but it should be made clear, and people should see it immediately upon visiting your page. A lot of furries in this fandom have pretty much normalized adult content, and I don't think they're always exposing children to it intentionally. Sometimes they may genuinely be unaware that there are minors following them, or just didn't consider the possibility that minors even exist. But it's immature regardless. I've seen a lot of minors in the furry community start to feel like they have to act like adults in ways they really shouldn't be because the environment around them is targeted at adults, but nobody is explicitly saying that to them. It's like if a child walked into an adult-only bar and nobody in the bar necessarily offered them any drinks, at least hopefully not, but nobody necessarily told them to leave. Like, that's the energy I get from it. And there's nothing wrong with adults sharing adult media with other adults, in my opinion. Like, do that if you want to, but that should be kept to adult-only spaces. Children should not be involved. Something I've experienced on Twitter was following a Pokemon artist who drew cute little chibi Pokemon artwork, and I thought it was cool, so I followed them, and nowhere did they specify they were an adult account, but out of nowhere one day, they posted an SFW media, and I had to unfollow the account and block them, and I was traumatized. And whether or not the person who did that meant for something like that to happen, it still did, and it can't be reversed. I'm still traumatized. And they should have specified they weren't a kid-friendly space so that I wouldn't have to see it to begin with. I might get flack for this, but in my opinion, for most content creators, it's not really hard to tell what age range your audience is. I can see it in YouTube analytics. I know you don't have that for every social media, but I can also see it based on some of the comments I get on my videos. I could see it based on who joins my Discord server. I know that most of my audience are older teenagers around my age as well as young adults, but I also know that there are outliers in my audience. And some people are tweens or just significantly younger than me in general. And some people are a lot older than me, so I try to make an effort to make my videos safe for that entire range. I try to censor as many curses as I can, at least in more recent videos. I still curse on Discord because it's in my vocabulary, and you should be at least 13 if you're joining Discord regardless, so it shouldn't be a problem. But I also try to clarify modern internet culture for older people who may have never seen it before. I think when people feign ignorance that a lot of kids follow them, it feels like they're turning a blind eye intentionally in a way, or just really immature because it takes very little effort to gather how old your audience generally is. It really isn't that hard to figure out. All in all, I really think the furry fandom does have an issue of endangering minors, either by unintentionally or intentionally exposing them to adult themes, or just generally interacting with them in adult-only ways, and it's something I really, really think should change. So okay, that's all for this video. If you watched all the way here and enjoyed it, then please consider subscribing. I'd love if you did that. Again, I want to emphasize that you shouldn't really go out of your way to harass innocent people, and stereotyping is a big problem that we should really avoid falling into the pattern of. So while these issues should be recognized, that does not mean they should be applied to every furry out there, because that's just not cool, and these things don't apply to every single person in the community. I hope this video was thorough enough. If there's something I missed or something you want to contribute your perspective on, feel free to drop a comment. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Also, Merry Christmas Eve. I don't know how I forgot to say that, or Christmas depends on when I upload this. I hope you guys have a happy holiday. If you celebrate, tell me what you got in the comments. Also, bye for my